Welcome. We are about to begin a thorough exploration of source material, custom tailored for you, the listener. Today, we are focusing on one of the most recognizable and I think widely misunderstood figures in global business history, Harland David Sanders, known around the world simply as Colonel Sanders, the founder and enduring symbol of Kentucky Fried Chicken, or KFC.
Our mission today is to really analyze his extensive biography, so move far past that simple, iconic white suit image that you see on every bucket.
Oh.
We want to understand the man who spent decades in just relentless struggle, the entrepreneur who faced these repeated devastating failures, and most compellingly, the volatile and intensely complicated relationship he had with the global empire he only managed to create in the twilight of his life.
We have a truly dense stack of biographical sources here, and what's immediately fascinating is just how late success arrived for him. I mean, he was well into his 60s before the franchising idea really even took hold, but when you look at his entire 90-year trajectory, you realize his incredible entrepreneurial vision was constantly competing with this deep-seated volatility and impatience.
Absolutely. We will be connecting that early instability, that tendency toward conflict, job loss, and just outright chaos, directly to the relentless, almost obsessive drive he showed in his later years. It's the perfect narrative of a man who was repeatedly knocked down, but who absolutely refused to accept defeat, even when eventually he was fighting the very corporate entity he himself had launched.
So let's begin at the very beginning. Let's start with his first 4 decades of really relentless turbulence, spanning from 1890 through 1930.
Okay, let's unpack this. Harland David Sanders was born on September 9th, 1890, in Henryville, Indiana. He was the oldest of 3 children.
And his early life was marked by sudden, profound hardship. His father, Wilbur David Sanders, died in 1895. Harlan was just 5 years old at the time.
That loss just thrust the family into poverty.
Sure.
His mother, Margaret Ann, had to find work immediately, and she got a very difficult job in a tomato cannery.
And you have to imagine the environment here. The mother of 3 young children working long, grueling hours away from home.
Which required the 5-year-old Harland to step into the role of primary caregiver and cook for his younger siblings.
And this wasn't just, babysitting. The sources confirm that by age 7, this is in 1897, he was already proficient with bread and vegetables, and he quickly became skilled at preparing meats.
This necessity, this absolute requirement to feed his family, it's a profound and often overlooked foundation for his entire culinary career.
Right. The kitchen for him was not a hobby, it was pure survival.
And this early burden, it seems to have impacted his ability to handle any kind of formal schooling. In 1903, at the age of 12, he dropped out of 7th grade.
When he was asked about it later, he gave a classic Sanders answer. He stated simply, and maybe a little dramatically, that algebra is what drove me off.
It really speaks to an impatience with anything that didn't provide immediate practical value.
Okay.
If he couldn't use it right then and there, he wasn't interested.
And that pattern of leaving and seeking independence started very early. By age 13, he completely left home. He took a job painting horse carriages in Indianapolis.
Then at 14, he moved to southern Indiana to work as a farmhand. I mean, this early life was just a continuous cycle of survival, of manual labor, and of transience.
He was constantly running toward the next opportunity, or you could argue running away from the last failure.
And that running led him, eventually, to the military. In 1906, at the audacious age of 16, he falsified his birth date to enlist in the U.S. Army.
He served briefly, acting as a wagoner in Cuba during the Second Occupation. And a wagoner in that era, you have to understand, wasn't just a driver.
No, not at all. It was someone responsible for transporting supplies, potentially ammunition. It required immense reliability and just pure physical strength.
He earned the Cuban Pacification Medal and was honorably discharged in February 1907. But it seems that military discipline really didn't stick with him.
Not for long, because the next 20 years were just a dizzying sequence of manual labor jobs, and each one seemed to end almost as quickly as it began.
He transitioned through, a blacksmith's helper on the Southern Railway, a role that demanded just brutal physical effort.
Right. Then he moved to Jasper, Alabama, to clean ash pans on locomotives. From there, he progressed to become a fireman, a steam engine stoker, on the Illinois Central Railroad for nearly 3 years.
And that was an incredibly demanding job. I mean, it required him to shovel tons of coal into a roaring firebox in just grueling, unbearable heat.
The fireman job lasted longer than most for him, but once again, his volatile personality got the better of him.
He became deeply involved in union affairs, very aggressively defending a fellow worker from being fired.
And eventually, he got sick and was fired himself, though the official reason was conveniently logged as insubordination.
So then he worked for the Norfolk and Western Railway, and after that, the Rock Island Railroad. It was just a constant, exhausting chase for the next paycheck, all of it defined by conflict.
What's truly remarkable, though, is that during all of this chaos, he tried to achieve some stability through professional education.
Right. While working the railroads, he studied law by correspondence. This was through LaSalle Extension University.
And he managed to move his family and actually practice law in Little Rock for 3 years. For a man who claimed algebra drove him from school, this self-study and success is just astonishing.
Wait, a successful legal career in Little Rock? A self-made lawyer? This is where it gets really interesting and tragically on brand for him.
It is. His legal career ended abruptly and very dramatically after a courtroom brawl with his own client.
With his own client, you read that correctly. He got into a physical altercation with the very person he was supposed to be defending.
And that single incident, as you can imagine, destroyed his local reputation instantly. It perfectly encapsulates that internal tension we talked about earlier.
The entrepreneurial vision and the drive were there, but they were constantly being sabotaged by his inability to manage his own temper and navigate professional constraints.
That's the key analysis. The biographer John Ed Pierce looked back on those first 40 years. Soldier, stoker, lawyer, farmer, insurance salesman, ferry operator, and he offered a concise, almost painful summation.
He wrote that Sanders had encountered repeated failure, largely through bullheadedness, a lack of self-control, impatience, and a self-righteous lack of diplomacy.
So if we accept that analysis, then his entire trajectory up to age 40 was defined by self-sabotage, regardless of his skill or the opportunity in front of him.
He was, it seems, built to be his own boss because he simply couldn't work for anyone else, but he hadn't yet found the product that could absorb his massive energy and vision.
He did have a few early financial successes that prove he had business acumen, even if he couldn't maintain them.
Right. Around 1920, at the age of 30, he established a ferry boat company operating on the Ohio River. He was a minority shareholder and the company secretary.
And the sources stress that the ferry was an instant success. It shows a clear capacity for identifying profitable ventures.
And he cashed out at the right time. He sold his shares for a very significant sum, $22,000.
To put that into perspective for you, that is equivalent to approximately $406,000 in 2024 value.
That's a huge windfall for a 30-year-old in the 1920s. He could have found stability right there.
But he immediately invested that entire sum into a new manufacturing venture, the acetylene lamp company.
And this venture failed entirely, just completely failed, because Delco, a competing company, introduced a far superior product, an electric lamp, which they cleverly sold on credit.
That instantly undercut Sanders' non-electric product and his ability to compete on financing. It was just bad timing mixed with a poor strategic move.
So failure followed success very, very closely, almost predictably.
We should also touch upon the personal relationships during this volatile period. In 1909, he married Josephine King. They had 3 children, Margaret, Harland David Jr., and Mildred.
The sources reveal a profound tragedy during this time, though. His only son, Harland David Jr., died in 1932 at the incredibly young age of 20.
Yes, from complications due to infected tonsils. This personal loss must have just compounded the immense professional instability he was already facing.
So, by 1930, we have a 40-year-old man who has failed at nearly every vocation he's tried, due to a combination of terrible luck and a truly difficult personality.
His savings were likely depleted, his reputation was fractured, and he was grieving the loss of his son. That sets the stage perfectly for the dramatic change that occurs in the next part of his life.
Right, his transition from a desperate roadside cook to the honorary colonel. This is the true turning point, and it begins in 1930.
He found a strange kind of sanctuary when the Shell Oil Company offered him a rent-free service station in North Corbin, Kentucky, in exchange for a percentage of the sales.
And this was during the Great Depression. Jobs were incredibly scarce.
So he was a service station operator selling gas, but he was always looking for ways to maximize his income. He quickly realized he could generate additional revenue by providing hot meals for travelers on that long stretch of highway, U.S. Route 25.
He started serving meals, including country ham, steaks, and of course his fried chicken.
And the initial setup is really crucial to understanding his scrappy origins. He didn't have a commercial kitchen.
No, he was serving customers paying guests in his adjacent living quarters. He literally cooked for people in his own home, often using his own dining room table. He was a domestic chef who became a roadside entrepreneur.
And it was at this location that the bullheadedness and conflict that characterized his youth surfaced again, but this time in a much more dangerous context.
Right, it revolved around competition for these roadside customers.
Sanders became involved in a conflict with Matt Stewart, a local competitor. The dispute centered on a sign that Sanders had put up, directing traffic to his station, which Stewart had then painted over.
This was more than just vandalism, it was a direct assault on Sanders' livelihood.
Tragically, this territorial dispute escalated into a shootout. Sanders was trying to repaint his sign when Stewart arrived.
And during the confrontation, a Shell employee who was accompanying Sanders was tragically killed.
Yes, Stewart was subsequently convicted of murder for the death of the Shell employee.
It's a very dark chapter that underscores the cutthroat nature of Depression-era roadside business. And we have to acknowledge the seriousness of that loss of life.
Absolutely. But purely from a business narrative standpoint, the removal of his primary direct competitor allowed Sanders' fledgling business to solidify its presence on that road.
And his local popularity grew significantly because his food was truly excellent. By 1935, Kentucky Governor Ruby Laffoon recognized his contribution to local hospitality and commissioned him as a Kentucky colonel.
As we noted, this is an honorific title, the highest awarded by the Commonwealth of Kentucky, not a military rank.
But it provided him with a crucial element he lacked before: legitimacy and a unique identity.
And the ultimate moment of external validation arrived in 1939 when the renowned food critic Duncan Hines visited.
Hines was a nationally recognized tastemaker, and he included Sanders' establishment, the Sanders Court and Cafe, and his widely respected guide, Adventures in Good Eating.
This was game-changing exposure. The guide entry specifically praised his sizzling steaks, fried chicken, country ham, hot biscuits.
It positioned his location, near the junction of roads 41 and 25, as a mandatory stop for any traveler heading toward tourist spots like Cumberland Falls and the Great Smokies.
He was no longer just a cook, he was a culinary destination.
And he responded to this success with expansion. In 1939, his entire North Corbin restaurant and motel burned down. A total disaster.
But he showed incredible resilience. He immediately had it rebuilt as a much larger establishment, a 140-seat restaurant and motel. He was absolutely committed to this business now.
And it was right after the rebuild, in July 1940, at the age of 50, that he finalized the core invention that would define his entire legacy.
This was the moment he perfected his secret recipe of 11 herbs and spices and, critically, his patented method for frying chicken.
Let's elaborate on the technical breakthrough here, because this is where the speed of his later success really comes from.
Well, historically, fried chicken was a slow, labor-intensive specialty item. You had to pan-fry it in high-heat oil for up to 30 minutes.
Which resulted in inconsistent quality and made it impossible for quick-service restaurants to produce it in high volume.
Sanders' genius was adapting the pressure cooker, which was a relatively new piece of consumer technology, for commercial frying.
By frying the chicken in a specialized pressure fryer, he dramatically increased the temperature and reduced the cooking time to just about 8 to 10 minutes.
This retained the moisture, it kept the skin crisp, and it made high-volume, quick production possible for the very first time.
It transformed fried chicken from a Sunday dinner item into a viable fast food product.
So he had the recipe, the method, and the facility. But then history intervened. World War II broke out, and gas rationing severely curtailed the tourist traffic that his roadside location depended on.
He was forced to close his Asheville motel and had to take on wartime government jobs. He worked as a supervisor in Seattle and later ran cafeterias in Tennessee.
And during this turbulent period, his personal life also caught up with him. He and Josephine divorced in 1947.
He finally married his longtime companion, Claudia Ludington Price, in 1949, and Claudia would prove to be an absolutely indispensable partner in the business that followed.
Then came the moment that truly cemented his transformation into the icon we know today. In 1950, he was recommissioned as a Kentucky colonel by a friend, Governor Lawrence Weatherby.
And this time, Sanders fully committed to the public identity.
He started wearing the famous outfit consistently. The goatee, the black ribbon bow tie, and eventually the signature white suit.
He even took to bleaching his mustache and goatee to match his white hair, making sure his appearance was instantly recognizable.
The sources confirm that for the last 20 years of his life, he wore nothing else in public. He understood that the uniform was the brand. He was no longer just Harland Sanders, he was the Eternal.
That distinction is key. He had successfully created a persona that stood out. And with that new public identity solidified, he was ready for the next most crucial phase, global expansion, starting in 1952.
We now move into the era of franchising and the unexpected sale, which covers 1952 through 1964. You have to imagine the state of mind of a man who is now 62 years old, having suffered catastrophic failures and personal tragedy, gambling everything on a new idea.
And what a gamble it was. In 1952, he franchised his recipe for the very first time. The recipient was a man named Pete Harmon, who operated one of the largest restaurants in South Salt Lake, Utah.
Harmon was looking for a gimmick, something to set his restaurant apart.
This first partnership instantly proved the concept. In just the first year of selling the product, Harmon's restaurant sales didn't just grow, they more than tripled.
And astonishingly, 75% of that massive increase was attributed directly to the fried chicken sales. It showed that the recipe, combined with the novelty, was scalable and highly desirable outside of the South.
And the name itself was born in Utah, not Kentucky. A sign painter hired by Harmon, Don Anderson, coined the name Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Which was marketing genius. It played perfectly on the unique Southern hospitality imagery, which was exotic and compelling in a state like Utah. It suggested a special, time-honored tradition.
So what was Sanders earning from this exploding success? It was a meager royalty that nevertheless added up fast. 4 cents per chicken.
While that sounds insignificant, if we translate that to 2024 value, he was earning about 47 cents per chicken.
When you are moving thousands of chickens a day, that small per-unit royalty becomes a torrent of wealth.
However, the transition to becoming a full-time franchisor was actually forced upon him by progress. Sanders initially believed his North Corbin restaurant would be his legacy.
But the new Interstate 75 bypassed his location entirely, routing traffic miles away. At age 65, he was suddenly stranded, watching his customer base just vanish.
This was catastrophic for him. He was forced to sell the original Sanders Court and Cafe. The sources indicate he was left with only his modest savings and a $105 monthly Social Security check.
To a man of that era, that $105, which is equivalent to about $1,200 in today's money, was not enough to retire on, especially with the pride and drive he possessed.
Imagine the anxiety of a 65-year-old man, having just built a successful business and a personal brand, being financially forced back to square one, relying on the federal government.
This adversity didn't crush him. It actually fueled his decision to devote himself full-time to franchising.
It was a truly relentless grind that defined those early years. He traveled all across the U.S., often sleeping in the back of his car in the early days.
And his sales method was intensely personal and practical. He would show up at a restaurant owner's location, offer to cook his chicken for the staff, and if they liked it, he would negotiate the franchise rights.
He was the chief salesman, chef, and logistics manager all rolled into one white suit.
As the company grew, the demand reversed. Potential franchisees started traveling to Kentucky to see him. In 1959, after closing the North Corbin site, he and Claudia opened a new restaurant and the company headquarters in Shelbyville.
And Claudia's role here was absolutely vital. She wasn't just his wife. She was the engine of the operation.
She took on the incredibly demanding job of mixing and shipping the complex spice blends, the secret recipe, to all the franchised restaurants, ensuring quality control over the core product.
The legal milestones quickly followed the expansion. Sanders was proactive in protecting his intellectual property. In 1962, he obtained a patent protecting his pressure frying method. That was the technological advantage.
And in 1963, he trademarked the now famous phrase, "It's finger-licking good."
The growth was staggering and exponential. KFC became one of the first American chains to expand internationally with great speed, opening outlets in Canada, the UK, Australia, Mexico, and Jamaica by the mid-1960s.
He had over 600 locations operational in just 12 years.
And that rapid expansion, reaching over 600 locations, it just became overwhelming for Sanders, who was well into his 70s.
He realized he could not possibly manage the logistics of a burgeoning international empire that was demanding professional management and standardization.
This led to the unexpected, though necessary, sale in 1964. At age 73, he sold the corporation for $2 million to a group of investors, including the young lawyer John Y. Brown Jr. and Jack C. Massey.
That $2 million is equivalent to a massive $20.3 million in today's value.
Crucially, the sale was complex. Sanders retained control of operations in Canada and, most importantly for the brand, became a salaried brand ambassador for life, earning a high income and ensuring his image remained central.
The sale was supposed to secure his retirement and his legacy. But what happened next is the most compelling chapter of all, covering the years from 1964 to 1980. The Colonel turned into the brand's fiercest critic.
This is the ultimate founder's conflict. It's a true tragedy of commercialization. Despite selling the company, Sanders remained the essential symbol, traveling nearly 200,000 miles a year for commercials and appearances, selling the brand he no longer controlled.
He retained significant, almost terrifying influence, not because of his contract, but because of his sheer personality. Franchisees and executives quickly learned to respect his culinary expertise, and, critically, they feared the force and variety of his swearing when he felt standards slipped.
He was a culinary warlord watching over his territory.
And that fear was justified, because standards did slip almost immediately, particularly when the new ownership started implementing cost-cutting measures driven by the need for massive scale and profit margins.
Sanders was profoundly and very vocally critical of the food quality.
His scorn was directed most fiercely at the new corporate gravy recipe, and you have to understand the personal betrayal here. Sanders had previously bragged that his original gravy was so good, it'll make you throw away the darn chicken and just eat the gravy.
It was a source of immense pride for him.
The new company Grazy, designed to reduce time, cost, and complexity for 600 locations, was something he absolutely despised. He felt it was a complete betrayal of his culinary integrity.
And he didn't hesitate to tell the world.
He publicly denounced the new version with remarkable intensity, describing it as having a wallpaper taste.
He broke down the cheap, synthetic ingredients the corporation was using, stating with absolute contempt. They buy tap water for 15 to 20 cents a 1,000 gallons, and then they mix it with flour and starch and end up with pure wallpaper paste.
He was trying to frame it not just as bad food, but as a deliberate scam on the customer. He knew the difference because, as he noted, he had seen his mother make real wallpaper paste.
He concluded that the corporate version had no nutrition in it and they ought not to be allowed to sell it.
And his critique didn't stop at the gravy. When the company, under new ownership, introduced a crispy fried chicken recipe to compete with other market trends, he publicly called it nothing in the world but a fried dough ball stuck on some chicken.
It's an incredibly vivid image. It really conveys his disgust with the texture and the excessive breading.
This was a man who felt his life's work had been commodified and ruined by bean counters. The sources confirm that as late as 1979, he was still making surprise visits to KFC restaurants.
And if the food disappointed him, he would confront the franchisee, sometimes pushing what he called terrible slop onto the floor.
This behavior highlights the fact that despite the $2 million sale, he could never separate his personal pride in the product from the corporate entity that now owned it.
This passionate and often aggressive defense of quality led directly to legal battles against his own company.
In 1973, Sanders sued Hublin Inc., which was the parent company at the time, arguing the misuse of his image in promoting products he hadn't helped develop. He felt the brand was dragging his personal name through the mud with inferior products.
And 2 years later, in 1975, the corporate entity struck back against their own founder. Hublin unsuccessfully sued Sanders for libel, following his widely published colorful descriptions of their gravy as sludge with a wallpaper taste.
It just speaks volumes about the level of animosity that the founder was engaged in litigation against the company he founded, primarily over a bowl of gravy.
The ultimate result of this tension was Sanders finding a loophole to reclaim his original culinary vision.
Sanders and Claudia reopened their Shelbyville restaurant, naming it Claudia Sanders, the Colonel's Lady. They served KFC-style chicken, attempting to recapture the quality he felt the fast food chain had lost, offering it as a full-service dinner menu item.
Naturally, KFC sued him over this direct competition. However, after reaching a settlement with Hublin, the restaurant was allowed to continue operating. Today, it still exists as the Claudia Sanders Dinner House.
What's profoundly significant is that this restaurant, the Claudia Sanders Dinner House, is the only non-KFC restaurant authorized to serve his original recipe, fried chicken, presented as part of a non-fast food dinner menu.
It stands as a physical testament to the Colonel's unwavering commitment to his culinary standards, serving the recipe exactly as he intended it, separate from the global chain.
That detail perfectly encapsulates the enduring, agonizing tension between the passionate entrepreneur and the cold necessity of scaling a corporate machine.
The Colonel was a failure at bureaucracy, but a genius at cooking. And that genius eventually pushed him into open warfare with the company that bore his image.
Now, let's transition to the final phase of his life and the incredible legacy he left behind, moving into the period between 1964 and his death in 1980.
After selling the U.S. operations, Sanders moved in 1965 to Mississauga, Ontario, a suburb of Toronto, to oversee his Canadian franchises, which he had successfully retained control of in the sale.
He continued to collect franchise and appearance fees both in Canada and the U.S., which ensured his continued wealth.
He also maintained his deep personal life commitments. His religious conviction was constant. In September 1970, he and his wife were baptized in the Jordan River.
He became friends with prominent religious figures like Billy Graham and Jerry Falwell, continuing his life as a major public figure in multiple spheres.
Professionally, he remained intensely active, appearing in his white suit to crowds across the globe right up until the month before he died. He was the most visible face in advertising worldwide.
Then, in June 1980, he was diagnosed with acute leukemia.
6 months later, on December 16, 1980, he died at the age of 90 in Louisville, Kentucky. The immediate cause of death was pneumonia, which was aggravated by the leukemia.
His passing was treated as a major national event. His body was laid in state in the rotunda of the Kentucky State Capitol in Frankfort, a highly rare honor typically reserved for governors or senators.
His funeral service was attended by over 500 people. He was buried, fittingly, in his characteristic white suit and black Western string tie in Cave Hill Cemetery in Louisville.
By the time of his death, the scale of the success he set in motion was just immense. There were an estimated 6,000 KFC outlets operating in 48 countries worldwide, generating $2 billion in annual sales.
And think about that. From a $105 Social Security check to a $2 billion empire in less than 30 years, starting in his 60s. It is arguably the most remarkable late-life career acceleration in American history.
Beyond the sales figures, his legacy also includes substantial philanthropy, particularly through his Canadian holdings.
He used his stock holdings to establish the Colonel Harland Sanders Charitable Organization, a registered Canadian charity.
And this organization made substantial donations to Canadian children's hospitals. For instance, the wing of Mississauga Hospital dedicated to women's and children's care is named the Colonel Harland Sanders Family Care Center in honor of his contribution.
This really demonstrates a deep commitment to giving back in the country where he spent his final working years.
Now we must turn to the ultimate measure of his enduring cultural legacy, his transformation into a pop culture symbol that constantly reinvents itself.
The image of the Colonel is just pervasive, and it's always being used and reinterpreted in modern advertising to keep the brand fresh.
It's a fascinating and almost bizarre list of modern portrayals. Since 2015, KFC has cycled through a long line of the comedians and actors to play the Colonel in television ads.
Right, essentially hiring a new actor every few months. This started with Daryl Hammond, then Norm Macdonald and Jim Gaffigan.
They've used the icon to promote different products and ideas. George Hamilton played the Colonel, capitalizing on his tan for the extra crispy chicken promotion.
Later, actor Billy Zane took over as the solid gold Colonel, wearing a shimmering white and gold suit.
The portrayals really showcase the brand's desire to constantly refresh the image while retaining the essential figure. Rob Lowe, who actually met Harland Sanders as a child, took on the role.
And he dramatically announced they were sending the Zinger chicken sandwich to space.
Ray Liotta, singer Reba McEntire, who holds the distinction of being the first female Colonel Jason Alexander, and professional strongman Hafar Julius Bjornsson have all played the role.
They even brought in Peter Weller to portray a RoboCop version of Colonel Sanders, designated as the guardian of the secret recipe. This is clearly a strategy to turn the Colonel from a historical figure into a dynamic, adaptable mascot.
And the icon transcended typical advertising channels entirely. The Colonel appeared in the DC Comics multiverse in 3 different promotional issues.
Yes, parodying major DC titles like Flash of Two Worlds and Crisis on Infinite Earths.
In these promotional comics, the Colonel teamed up with characters like Green Lantern and Flash, battling villains such as the Anti-Colonel and Colonel Grodd.
It's an indication of how deeply embedded the Colonel's image is within the public consciousness, that he can seamlessly enter a superhero universe.
And in fictional appearances outside of advertising, the Colonel is often used as a stand-in for major capitalist figures. In the 2002 novel Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami, a character based on him appears when an abstract concept takes on the appearance of a famous capitalist icon.
It highlights his status as a recognizable symbol of American commerce.
Perhaps the strangest example of the Colonel's life extending into pop culture is the 96-page romance novella, Tender Wings of Desire, which KFC released in 2017.
Set in Victorian England, it featured Sanders as a love interest for a lady who had to choose between a life of order and a man of passion. It just shows the incredible versatility and absurdity of the modern icon.
His cultural footprint even extends into international folklore, specifically in the world of Japanese baseball, thanks to the peculiar urban legend known as the Curse of the Colonel.
That's right. In 1985, during a boisterous fan celebration after the Hanshin Tigers baseball team won the Central League Championship, jubilant fans took a nearby statue of Colonel Sanders and threw it into the Dotonbori River in Osaka.
And the statue was subsequently lost. The urban legend maintained that the curse of the Colonel's ghost prevented the Tigers from winning the Japan series again until the statue was fully recovered.
It became a decades-long running joke and superstition, often blamed for every near miss and failure the team suffered.
And the legend truly persisted. After decades of losses and failed recovery efforts, the Hanshin Tigers finally prevailed in 2023, just years after parts of the original statue, the torso and legs, were recovered from the river mud.
It just highlights how deeply the image of the Colonel has become embedded not just in business, but in international folklore and superstition, far surpassing the product itself.
So as we review the totality of the source material, we are left with this extraordinary contrast. A man who failed constantly and profoundly for 40 years, found staggering financial and global success at age 62, and then spent his final years passionately fighting to protect the quality of the very product that made him famous.
It's the story of a man hardwired for conflict, whose bullheadedness first caused him to lose jobs, then motivated him to build an empire, and finally turned him against that empire when it didn't meet his personal standards.
John Y. Brown Jr., one of the investors who bought the company, summarized the Colonel as a brilliant man with a gourmet flair for food, a visionary and a great motivator, with the style of a showman and the discipline of a Vince Lombardi.
Ultimately, his legacy is not just the food or the white suit. It is the enduring tension between the passionate, quality-driven entrepreneur Sanders and the corporate machine that must prioritize profit and scale, represented by Harland and KFC.
His final decades were a tireless crusade to maintain standards against intense cost-cutting pressures, a universal lesson for any business founder struggling to see their original vision commodified.
Considering his intense commitment to the original recipe and the fact that only one non-KFC restaurant today, the Claudia Sanders Dinner House, is authorized to serve that version. Well, what does that say about the true cost, both culinary and personal, of scaling a beloved quality product into a massive global brand? It raises the question of whether true quality can ever survive maximal commercialization.
Thanks for listening.